Welcome to another installment of Author Stalker live at Lurgio here in Bedford, New Hampshire. It's a pleasure for me to introduce and share with you author Katy Grant from Phoenix, Arizona, brought to you live here thanks to the Bedford Education Foundation. This time the Author Stalker went out and grabbed her own pen and wrote a grant. And the Bedford Education Foundation awarded this grant to Katy Grant and to me on behalf of the students here at Lurgio Middle School for 3 days of writers' workshops and then an assembly for the whole school and then, of course, our interview with the Author Stalker. So we're thrilled to have Katy Grant here for a 3-day extravaganza. And I have to say, you're settled into your hotel. You just got here. It's pouring rain and 50 degrees. I'm a little worried about the temperature here being half what you're used to in Phoenix, Arizona. So sorry, Katy.
Don't apologize. No apologies necessary. You know, the only thing I was looking for was something different besides relentless sunshine and heat. And so we definitely have that here in New Hampshire. So I am thrilled. I love all the green. I love the rain. And the cool weather, you know, we don't get a lot of it in Phoenix.
Okay.
Yeah. So you always like what you don't get a lot of, and so, you know, we don't get this very often, so I actually love it. Yeah.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Relentless sunshine sounds a little good to me, but that's okay. We have a lot planned. We, as a school, as you know, have a whole school read to celebrate a community of literacy. And we share an entire faculty of students, staff. Everybody in the whole Lurgio community reads one book over the course of the year. And this year, the book choice was Hide and Seek by you. So you and I have shared emails over the course of the year.
Quite a few, yeah.
And I was able to write this grant and get you here for 3 days. We have a lot planned over the next 3 days.
Yeah,
so
I'm so excited.
You're settled in your hotel. You made the flight safely. I snagged you back. What are your thoughts about the next 3 days with us in a school of 7th and 8th graders?
Well, you had warned me in the email. You said, I've got a lot planned for you, but I was looking at the schedule and I am thrilled. You know, the idea of the workshops, you know, going in, working with the students, having, you know, a different group of students for each workshop and being able to work with them in a small group like that. You know, I'm a teacher. I have been a teacher for much longer than I've been a writer. I have 25 years of teaching experience behind me, and I love being in the classroom. And so I'm really excited about the workshops. And then I'll be doing a presentation to the whole school where I'm going to talk to them. The question that writers get most often, where do your ideas come from? So I'm going to talk to them a little bit about where the inspiration for my book came from. But, you know, I, as a reader, love to hear those stories as well. You know, when I read my favorite books, I think, how did the writer come up with this idea? So I love hearing the stories behind the stories. And so I've got a few stories to tell them about, you know, maybe some of their favorite writers that they might not have heard yet.
That's wonderful.
So we'll be doing that as well. And I understand I'm going to get to meet some of the faculty at Lurgio as well. And so I'm eager to hear what the faculty are doing in their classes with writing with these great middle school students. So I am thrilled. I'm very excited.
I wrote it into the grant, the Katy Grant grant that I like to call it, that you got a chance to work with the whole school in an assembly and then work with each pod, is what we call them here at Lurgio. There's 4 groups of students per grade to work with each of those in a writer's workshop. The whole school, and then also the faculty, because they're the ones who are teaching writing to students. And whenever I learned that you taught at the college level, I thought, you've got expertise and experience that you can share with our faculty. So I'm calling those academic discussions with 2 groups of teachers. So we have that to look forward to.
Sounds wonderful.
In addition to the writers' workshops and the assembly. Well, let's back up. Let's go talk about Hide and Seek a little bit. And the thing that drew me to Hide and Seek was the geocaching.
Okay.
Such an unusual hook to a story, and such a great component. But our 8th graders spend the first big part of their year studying outdoor, with an outdoor experience ending with a trip on Cardigan, Mount Cardigan here in northern New Hampshire. And we have geocaching there. So what a perfect...
So they've been doing this then.
They've been doing that. So
Great,
what
great.
led you to, how did that experience of geocaching impact your writing for hide and seek?
Well, you know, as you're saying, geocaching, it's a relatively new activity. It hasn't been around a lot, but when kids find out about it and they get into it, they're just drawn to it. I was introduced to geocaching by my older brother, who, you know, we live in Arizona. My brother lives in Tennessee. I'm originally from Tennessee, and he's stayed there his whole life. My brother doesn't have children, and so he kind of borrows my two sons. Now,
You've got two sons.
My two sons are all grown up now, but when they were little boys, anytime we would go and visit my brother or he would come and visit us, he always wanted to take my boys geocaching. And I still remember the first time he told us, you know, we're going geocaching. And I thought, what is that? I have no idea. You know, geo-earth, and then a cache is some kind of, you know, storage or container. And so I found out what it was by going on this geocaching adventure with my brother and my boys. And so you have a GPS system. You first go to a website and you put in your own coordinates and figure out, okay, well, where am I? And from my location, what geocaches are there nearby? And so the website can tell you there's one 5 miles away, there's one 2.6 miles away. You put in those coordinates and then you let your GPS lead you to that location. Well, there's a little container hidden somewhere, and it can be, you know, some are urban geocaches in a busy city hidden away. Some are, the ones we really enjoyed were, you know, if we could go out on a hike and, you know, be, you know, kind of out in the woods.
So you did this yourself?
We did. And so, you know, my brother introduced us to this, and when I was with him, you know, I'd be along and the boys would be so fascinated with it, trying to find the little container. It's got a log inside, a little piece of paper where you write down, we're the ones who, you know, we found this last. And then there might be little items. You can take something that you've brought along for exchange. It could be anything. I always say it's like the Happy Meals toys, you know, the little kind of junky things. You can leave something and then take something with you. Well, my boys were captivated by this. And I was thinking, there is something here.
There's a story here.
This would make a great starting point for, because, you know, I write for children, and I thought, I think I could do something with this.
So that was the nugget.
So starting geocaching, but what really got the ball rolling was a trip that my family and I, without my brother, just my husband and our two boys, took. It was in the fall of the year, and it was to Currier, Arizona, which is up in the White Mountains of Arizona. You've got your own White Mountains, right?
Yes, we do.
Well, we were up there for 4 days, and it was in the fall, and it was off season because, you know, the peak season for these little mountain towns will be the summer, or you know, then also winter's a big season for skiing and so forth. But we were up there, and we did some geocaches. We took our dog along. We saw a lot of...
Dog named Dexter.
I have a dog named Dexter. We saw a lot of wildlife, and after that vacation, I came home, and a week later, I started taking notes because the story really started to take off from there. We are so glad you did, and it was all because of this experience. You had not had an experience of geocaching, really, or to put that into a book before. Not at all.
You've been writing a series of summer camp secrets.
Yes.
Which is for younger kids and more so the girls population. And so this was really your first time writing with a male protagonist.
It was.
And which is a little different.
It was.
And this was a standalone book versus a series. So can you talk about, as a writer, how that was going from a series to a standalone, and that now your voice was a boy voice versus all these girls that you've created for Summer Camp Secret?
Well, you know, I'll tell you, Kate, because the thing about that boy protagonist, I had just, in my Summer Camp Secret series has 6 books. And I had just finished, I'd been working on the first 3. And while I love the girls, They were wearing me out. Even though I was the creator and I was the one who was coming up with their conflicts and their fights.
The drama.
All the drama of the 12-year-old girls. And so they were really kind of wearing me out, and I was ready for a change. I thought, I'm ready for a boy. I'm ready for a boy protagonist. I only have boys. I have my two sons and no girls. And I also knew, from my son's experience, that boy books are so hard to find.
Right.
Librarians, teachers, they're always craving.
That's
we
true.
want
Girls
more.
will read anything.
Yeah.
Boys are picky.
Yeah, and they wanted more boy books, and so I immediately for this story had a boy character in mind. And as far as a standalone title versus a series, well, you think back to the early days of writing. They were all standalones. The concept of series, relatively new. But in children's lit, as you know, series. The thing about the series is that the kids, once they find a book they love, they don't want it to end.
True.
And so that's the great thing about the series, is that it can keep going in a way because they love that character or they love that setting.
Well, that's why the geocaching works so well for our boys here, that they can totally appreciate the activity, the adventure, the mystery. And hide and seek is a mystery, much more beyond adventure, where it gets to the core of family issues. And when did all of those strands get woven in? Did you start off writing with just a geocaching thought?
I did.
Now this is interesting because you've got so much more depth, it's so much more substantive with values and family and themes. And did that surprise you as a writer as you were working on it? Tell us about that, Katy.
Yes. Well, I used to teach at Arizona State University, and we had a writer in residence there, Ron Carlson, excellent short story writer. And I attended a workshop with him last fall, and he was talking to a group of writers, a group of students, and he said no one should be more surprised by the story than the writer. I think he was paraphrasing Flannery O'Connor, actually. And I love that because it is true.
The writer herself being surprised as she's writing.
There are surprises that happen when you're writing. And so the family values that you mentioned, some of those themes, none of that was there in the beginning. In the beginning, it was only geocaching. I imagine Chase, the 14-year-old protagonist, and I imagine him, a boy and his dog. And so the kind of classic elements, the kind of Lassie elements, but then the new technology as well with the geocaching, but the family story, because we have Chase's family, which, is a very modern family. It's not the nuclear family.
Right.
And then, we have that in contrast with the young boys who he meets and their family experience being very different from Chase's family as well. And those elements, those strands, they kind of grew over time.
I can see how they did grow in there, and I think what really struck me in reading Hide and Seek was the element of secrets, that here we have these two families that are separate, and yet they intersect, and they each have a secret. And how did that surprise you as a writer?
And, I think, especially for this age group, these young kids, they have a lot. We don't realize, as adults, we often forget the depth that they have at this age.
So true.
And they often do have, for them, what are deep secrets, dark secrets, things that maybe even their best friends don't know about. Those private, kernels that
a burden.
Yes. Yes. And so it's a lot for a young person like that to, have a secret that they're, struggling with and dealing with.
What was your biggest surprise when you were writing it? What surprised you the most when you were writing and you realized, I've got something that I've got to add in here that I didn't know I was going to be addressing in my novel?
Well, the funny thing is, I finished writing this book, the first draft. A complete draft. It's not like the book was finished at that point by any means. But after I had gotten the complete first draft, I set it aside, and the very next day in my journal, I was writing, and I said, I've finally figured out what this book is about.
Wow.
Which is a strange thing. The book is finished and now I'm discovering what the book is about. To me, the real story of hide and seek is that it's a rite of passage. I never knew that when I was writing the book.
That's incredible.
I did not have it in mind.
Yep.
I didn't think that that was my goal.
But it was a big reveal.
It was the big reveal.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people were asking me about my writing, and I kept saying, boys' adventure book.
Yeah.
Boys' adventure book. I'm writing a boys' adventure book. You call it a mystery. There
Yeah.
are so many elements of mystery
Yeah.
in there as well. But to me, that was how that was the...
Your envision.
Yeah, that was the
How you
category
envisioned
that I
it.
put it in.
Yep.
And then I thought it's a rite of passage because in it, Chase, one of the things he wants most is, you know, he's 14, and he wants to move from that, you know, boyhood to manhood.
Yes.
And the night alone in the desert,
Frightening.
where he loses his GPS
Yeah.
and he's by himself and he's alone, and then he emerges. He has to do it by himself. He can't do it with the tools. He can't
Yep.
do it with technology.
Yeah, he's alone.
At the end, he has to figure it out on
Yep.
his own.
Yep.
And afterwards, I said to myself, why? Why did you write that story? Well, I stopped and looked around my house.
Yep.
And at the time, I had a 14-year-old, which happens to be the same age as Chase.
As Chase, yeah.
And by the way, that 14-year-old was not Chase in any
Yep.
way.
Yep.
Their personalities were completely
Completely different.
But I had a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old. And
Very
so after I
interesting.
finished writing, I went to each of them separately, and I asked them, you know, you're growing up, you know, you're a teenager. And when you think about growing up, do you think about being an adult or do you think about being a man?
Oh,
and each
that's
of them separately.
such a great question.
And each of them separately said, I think about being a man.
Interesting.
And I realized what an important thing that was for boys, that feeling of now I am a man. Now Chase, at the end of the book,
wow.
he's not really a man, and yet I think he's gone through, you know, that growth and
Right.
that change.
Well, he has a lens on what's about to become of him. And that's what you provided for us as readers, which is so great. Now, when the kids are working through their whole school read, there's lots of different ways that it can be used by teachers. They can use it as a whole pod, reading it at the same time. They can do it every other day. They can do it in small increments. There's a group that took it in Ziploc bags up onto Mount Cardigan and sat around the campfire at night to do that, to share hide and seek. And then there's the group that just motored through it in 2 weeks. We're going to read it every day. Then there's the group who said, to the teacher said, I'm going to read it out loud to you, you're going to follow along. And there's a group that said, we're going to read it out loud together, where students and teachers are going to be reading it. So that's
so many
the
ways.
beauty of a whole school read.
Yes.
And hide and seek fit into all of those components, which is great.
You know, well, and one thing I want to say to you, Kate, is when I got your first email, which was back in August,
to
the
say
kids don't
a whole
realize
school is reading this. What did you think?
Well, the kids, you know, they're still on vacation,
Right.
and they don't realize that their teachers are working and that they're working for them and that they're making all these plans for, you know,
Stalker never rests.
for the upcoming year. But I was so struck when you
Really?
described your program to me. It gave me such pause, and I said, this is amazing. The thing that's so amazing about this is writing is really a solitary activity. It's something that you do by yourself, curled up on your couch, reading a good book.
Right.
And it's a very private and personal activity, and yet you've turned it into a community experience.
Right.
And so creating that whole community of readers. And I love that there's so many different ways that they approach the book, because that's how it is. You know, you can approach a book in so many different ways. I especially love that the teacher, you know, some of the teachers chose to read aloud to the students, because even though, you know, they're 13, 14.
Absolutely.
I read to my boys until they were that age as well.
I can't stress that enough, that in 7th and 8th grade, I would love to have teachers read out loud to their kids every day. And that's just kind of a little lure that I can say, this is a great book, read it out loud.
Right, right.
You're never too old.
You're not, you're not. And I think a lot of times as parents and as teachers, we forget that once the child is an independent reader, okay, you can read now, and that ends. but my favorite time of the day, and I always made time for it because it was my favorite, and it was one of those things where I don't care whether you want to listen or not, I want to read to you.
Right.
And so my two boys and I would curl up together in bed.
Yep.
We would always do it in bed.
So nice.
And I swear we read, you wouldn't imagine that
everything.
Some of the things that we, I read Great Expectations.
That's great.
To my son.
Right, because you were reading it to them.
Right.
You could do that.
Right. And we laugh out loud.
Yeah.
Dickens, people forget that how much humor Dickens has, but we had some laugh out loud moments.
That's so wonderful.
Well,
that will carry
I love
them
hearing
into
that teachers are doing that.
Adulthood and being a man, they will read to their kids too. We're going to take a break, but I want to talk in a minute about you teach at the college level, and now you're going to be teaching at the 7th and 8th grade level, Writer's Workshop for 7th and 8th graders.
Right.
And we say all the time that writers read and readers write. So let's come back and talk about what it's like to be a writer who reads and what's it like to be a reader who writes.
Great.
And we'll address all that too. So Author Stalker will be right back. Thanks for being with us for another installment with Katy Grant. And we're back. Welcome. Okay, Katy, we left off talking about your work as a college professor, Arizona State University, the community college, and the tutoring you do, and the workshops that you take so you can be better with your writing as well. Okay, we're going to translate that. I read that about you, and that was really my nugget. Geocaching was your nugget, that experience for hide and seek. That was my nugget for saying, I bet I could get her to come here with the Bedford Education Foundation opportunities of teachers extending their curriculum. There's an idea here that I wanted to percolate to say, how can we translate for our 7th and 8th graders, and how can we translate that for our teachers who have to teach writing in the traditional language arts and also math? How do you write about your thinking there? How do you write about your thinking in science? How do you write about your thinking in social studies? That really was my inspiration.
Great.
And so can you talk about how you're going to work with, work with 7th and 8th graders? You provided for me an amazing packet.
Thank you.
For the kids. I loved seeing that. So can you talk to me about that shift from teaching at the college level to teaching at the middle school level?
And I think it all comes down to, just understanding your audience, but a lot of times there's not a big difference there.
We're going to take a break for a moment. And we're back, and I don't think we'll have any more bells and whistles at our middle school, but we're known for bells and whistles at a middle school. So Katy was just talking about teaching at the college level and then now teaching for 7th and 8th graders, and it really is the same idea with a different audience. Can you extend that thought?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it in writing,
it really is.
One of the most important starting points is figuring out who your audience is. And obviously an audience of middle school students will be different from an audience of college students, and so you'll make adjustments accordingly. But a lot of the elements of writing
are the same.
They're the same.
And
there's
this is
not
what
a
these
big
guys
difference.
have studied.
There's not a big difference. The type of writing that they're doing at this level and the type of writing they'll do in high school and then on into college. So there is that continuity. And I think, when we talk about writing, writing is discovery.
Right.
Writing is thinking, and one thing I talk about... Being surprised. And one thing that I talk about I talk about with my own creative writing students, and I hope to share with the Lurgio students, is that oftentimes creative writers don't know where their story is going. Just as I was telling you.
You were saying.
You start with an idea, you don't know the full story. How does that translate to academic writing? Well, writing is a way to help you grasp the material, to understand, what were the concepts that we have been discussing. When we talk about, the causes of this event in history. When we talk about, the process, this scientific process that takes place, any of the types of academic writing that they may have to do, writing helps them get a grasp on it.
Right.
It helps them get hold of it. And so there's
the
a lot of
level
discovery.
of thinking.
It is.
Right. So there really is that sense of discovery, and I'm thinking that writers are writing what they're thinking, and you have to understand what you're thinking. So when we're talking to our teachers with these academic discussions coming up, it's our job as teachers to make sure kids have a grasp and an understanding, but they're not going to necessarily start with that ability.
Right.
So they have to work through writing it even in the process of that discovery.
Absolutely. And there are things that you think you know. It's in your head, and you do know it.
Yep.
You really do know it. But when a teacher asks you, now articulate that through writing,
It's
even though
different.
you know it, it may be
a different
hard.
beast.
Yes, and so
Yeah.
stretching students that way and getting them to, you know, take what it is that you have learned from this experience or
Well,
learned
you
from
have a talent for stretching students. I could see that with your college students and the packet that you gave us. It's been really fun sharing with the kids to say, here's this published author who is on lists of different states' books that kids have to read. You know, and you're being published in French, and you're here. And with that same type of packet that's very substantive, you talk about character development, conflict, plot, setting, theme, surprises, conclusions. We'll never be able to get through all of it.
Right, right.
But we have that packet. And can you give us a little tease about what that packet's about?
And see, that was the challenge for me, knowing that I was going to have the students for basically 90-minute workshops, and I'm so excited about getting in there, you know, with the students and working with them. But I thought, you're right, so many elements to storytelling.
Yes.
How do you strip it down to the basics? So
Right.
I'm really going to concentrate on, you know, the basics of storytelling, and because there has to be some starting point. They can learn, you know, just get the juices flowing.
Right.
You know, just get the ideas coming to them, and they can learn about some of the more sophisticated elements at a later time.
Yep.
But just discovering, you know, let's start with the meat of a story. You know, we're going to start talking about character. We're going to start talking about what's happening to that character in conflict. Yes.
Well, that's one of the things in designing this grant, was that the kids would be able to, we'd be scooping up about 20 kids per pod. The kids who are interested in writing, love writing, are interested in reading, whether they're special ed, regular ed, grade level, advanced, it doesn't matter. We're using that core as being interested in writing and working with them in the moment with you, so they get a chance to write, to share, to reflect, and that's thrilling for us to think that we could have that moment happen. Do you think that that was appealing to you too?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
True.
As you know, as I said, with my teaching experience, I love being in the classroom, and I love connecting with students.
Yes.
And you know, when I do school visits, various ages that I see, you know, sometimes younger elementary school students, you know, the middle school students, and I'm used to my college kids. So, you know, so, going into schools and working with students, age groups that I don't have as much contact with, it gives me a completely different perspective. But that's one of my favorite things to do, is to really connect with the students and to have them, you can see those little light bulbs floating over their heads. You know, when they get it, you see it.
Yeah.
You see
Does
it
that
in
happen
their
in
faces.
college?
It does.
That happens in college too.
It does.
You know, I love 7th and 8th grade, and I always say that they're, no offense to my audience out there, that they are toddlers with 10 years of experience, but they surprise you all the time. And I think that the great thing about this grant is that these guys will get an authentic experience with a published author.
I hope so.
And I'm sure they will. And the great thing about that we've been able to scoop up, working with each pod of teachers, that we also wanted to do a presentation for the whole school. Not everybody, I mean, we could keep you forever and have an opportunity for every kid to have a private writer's workshop experience, because it's authentic and substantive. But we've also asked in the grant that you present to the entire school. That would be 800 of us, and that's a very different presentation than the intimate writer's workshop in our beautiful media center. So could you talk to us about your whole school presentation?
Absolutely. And, you know, Kate, you were very helpful when I was planning everything to, you know, help me get a sense of who the audience was. And I even asked you for some ideas, you know,
Yep.
what do you think the students would really, you know, respond to? But what I want to focus on, the story that I really want to tell the students is about where ideas come from, because people come
That's
to
their
writers
first question.
often
Always.
is, you know, they're so curious.
Always.
And I, as a reader, I'm curious about that as well.
Yep.
And so I'm going to share with the students, you know, the genesis of hide and seek, which, you know, you and I have been talking
Yep.
about. That's right.
You have to wait for the assembly.
And share
Don't
that.
tell, no spoiler alert.
And some other stories that I've heard, you know, throughout the years, because I collect those stories about
Oh, that's awesome.
other writers and their sources of inspiration. So that's my plan for...
This is secret because Katy Grant hasn't even shared with me, the author stalker, what her presentation is going to be for the assembly. So you'll have to wait for that. But that's really exciting. So, but in talking to the kids, and especially about hide and seek, 7th and 8th graders, they like blood and guts. So the things that they are asking me are questions like, what's it like to be rejected? How do you find an editor? How do you find a publisher? How do you edit? How do you get beyond that point? How many edits do you do? And then they think, does she hang out with other authors? And how many people have stalked you? And so can you talk about the blood and guts of writing, even though it's a very private, lonely event?
It is.
But then it's shared so publicly.
Yes, yeah, it's true, because writers tend to be introverts.
Yep.
There are a lot of shy writers out there who like to stay at home with their laptops or, you know, their writing tablets and not go out into the world. So it is a very different experience of being at home and writing privately versus, you know, coming out.
Well, we're lucky to have you here.
Thanks.
So thank you for stepping out.
But, you know, it's one of those things, those seem like the inside secrets, you know. How do you go about, you know, how do you find an editor? How do you find an agent? Rejection.
Right.
Let's start with rejection.
Okay.
And everyone will be rejected.
Going big. Everyone will be rejected.
Everyone will be rejected. And I love the stories, too, about these fabulous books that we all love and that are classics, and to hear the initial reactions to some of those books was not positive. You know, many famous writers were rejected initially, and people don't realize that. And it's very inspiring to hear that this
A Wrinkle in Time.
Right.
A Wrinkle in Time, that's the one that comes right to mind.
Kept being rejected over and over and over again because it was so different.
Right.
And yet that's what we love about it, and that's why we continue to read it. So rejection, that's always a part of it. And it seems so personal, but a lot of times it's not as personal as we feel it is, because it's, you think about actors going out for auditioning for parts, and you think about, you know, this actor for this role, well, he or she is just not right for that part. And the same is true for a book.
That's a great parallel. That's a great parallel.
Company.
Yeah, so did you have to like take rejections and just put them on a shelf and say, I haven't found my match yet, I'm okay, it's a good story, I believe in it, and Peachtree published it?
Peachtree is my publisher for Hide and Seek. And, you know, when I was first starting out as a new unpublished writer, I had the great fortune of getting some nice rejections, some
nice rejections, oxymoron.
Some encouraging rejections, because you have your standard form letter.
Okay.
And that's the standard rejection. But if you get a rejection where there's like a personal note at the end, or where an editor takes the time, and that shows that the editor had a great deal of interest in the book, but for whatever reason, because it's not always up to the editor. It wasn't a match. Right.
It wasn't a match then and there.
It wasn't a match, and you would be surprised how many editors want to acquire a book and can't because of what's going on in the publishing company at the time.
Really?
So that happens as well.
So there's a backstory that drives their decision.
There are all those stories. There are.
It sounds like the drama of middle school. Sounds exactly like that.
So with Rejection, I had that great fortune of having some very encouraging rejections early on, so that when the mean rejections, when the tough rejections, when the rejections came in that said, this is unpublishable, but I'd had a previous rejection that said, I really like this, and we can't take this, but we would like to see something else from you in the future. I could balance it, and it gave me perspective. And so that was really helpful.
Okay, so 2 more questions that I want to ask about the blood and guts, the middle school kids coming up and saying, hey, Mrs. Schoedinger, Mrs. Author Stalker, will you ask this for Katy Grant too? One of them is, did you know that you were going to be a writer as a kid, as a 7th and 8th grader? What led you through this path of writing? And then what's your routine of writing? Do you have a legal pad? Are you a laptop girl? Do you have a special pen? Do you dictate? What's your routine? I always say to the kids, I know that Roald Dahl wrote 9 a.m. to noon every day in his little shed in his backyard. And if he was creative and working, and at noon he would stop even if he was mid-thought.
Which is amazing.
Didn't have a thought. It is discipline. If he didn't have a thought, he sat there. So that just has always really struck me. So what's your routine, and then what led you in the path of writing? You can answer either way that you see fit.
Well, let's talk about as a writer, you know, where did that aspiration come from? Because when I was 8 years old, I read the biography of Louisa May Alcott.
Wow.
Now, the funny thing is, I never actually got around to reading Little Women.
Interesting.
But I read her biography.
At 8? That seems like a
I was in the 3rd grade.
Choice, or was it a young adult version?
It was a series. It was actually a series of biographies that were geared towards those elementary school readers. And
interesting.
I have to tell you, we're sitting here in a library, and this is my favorite place. In school, on library day, that was my favorite day of the week. Every single week I would check out a new book and I would read a new book.
Might want to say that again for our media specialists in the Bedford School District. We love that.
So forever after,
we love library day.
I have a soft spot in my heart for librarians because that's what it meant to me as a child.
That's awesome.
So I read Louisa May Alcott's biography, and I still remember I was 8 years old, and you know, like I said, I grew up in Tennessee. I walked out into the backyard. We had this beautiful mimosa tree in the backyard, and I climbed up into the mimosa tree, and I thought, I think I want to be a writer.
Wow.
And from that point on, I never gave up that dream.
So
that was
incredible.
Really the starting point.
I love that story.
And you know, through all the years of rejection, and there were many, because I started writing seriously in 1992. My son was...
As an adult?
As an adult.
So from 8th grade, when you climbed down from that tree, having read that biography, did you keep a journal? Or?
I didn't.
Okay, so it wasn't until you were an adult that you really tackled it.
It was not, and so you know, when I get letters and emails from young readers who say, I've written something, you know, I love your books and I want to be a writer, and here's a story that I wrote. I am so impressed and amazed with them because I said it, but I never did anything about it for a long, long time. I started writing seriously in 1992, and at the time I was a stay-at-home mom. I had a 2-year-old. And I did not get my first book contract in 2006. So that 2-year-old, that 2-year-old was driving by the time that I got that first contract. So there were long years of rejection and me thinking this may never happen. And I told myself, it's okay, because you tried. And I knew that it made me feel okay about it.
Oh my gosh, this is so valuable for our kids to hear.
It did make me feel okay about it because I said, at least you tried.
Okay, and I think that you talk about patience and perseverance and affirmation, that you tried to do that. That's incredible. That's going to be so powerful for our 7th and 8th graders to hear, because kids have all signed up and they're ready for these writer workshops. They have that desire, that need. They're driven to write, and to hear that it matters, and it's not going to be right away, maybe, or it could be. It's okay.
If they're looking for quick fame and instant
Yeah,
stardom.
this is not it.
They better, yeah, you know, America's Got Talent.
Yeah.
You know, do that instead,
Yeah.
because this you rarely hear of those overnight success stories, and the overnight success stories aren't overnight. It just seems as though they're overnight.
Wow. So what was your first success getting published and not getting a rejection letter, but getting the "we want to publish your story" letter?
The first success was, like I said, it came in 2006, and it was a book that I had begun writing in 1992.
Wow.
So my agent, I had just taken my son to school and come home, and I saw, you know, the light flashing on the phone. And I checked the caller ID, and I saw my agent's name there, and I said, the only reason she would be calling me would be if she had some good news.
Yes. Yes.
And so I listened to the message, and
there was good news.
There was the message saying that Aladdin, Simon & Schuster imprint, wanted to publish my summer camp book, and so that was how I got the
first
news.
in the series of Summer Camp Secrets.
The first book, and it was just, you know, one of those life-changing events.
Did you jump? Did you yelp? Did you just go, oh, finally? What was that first thought?
Unbelievable, unbelievable. It was the dream come true. It was that what I had been wanting, you know, ever since I was that little 8-year-old girl sitting in that tree. And so,
well, tell us about your routine. What is your routine? Okay, that's so cool. I love that. The kids are going to love that story.
I know, you know, I love hearing the stories about how authors, you know, what was their experience as well. And I also love, you know, meeting authors in person and finding out, you know, they're just regular people.
I might have a stalker sidekick. This is good.
It's true. I've done a little bit of my own stalking as well.
That's so my follow-up question after the routine.
Well, my routine, and I do think writers can tend to be really picky, and I often ask my own creative writing students, I want to know what their routine is as well. I am really particular. There's one particular type of pen that I use.
Really?
I like black ink.
Yep.
I do like legal pads, but again, I'm very particular about what kind of legal pad it is.
This is great.
It has a spiral across the top, and it has a cover, and that's because when I was using traditional legal pads, you know, just your long yellow pad,
that folds over
when
the
I
top.
folded it over and over, eventually the pages started tearing off. And so then I would lose it, and I didn't want that. And so I like the spiral-bound long legal pad with a cover on the front and black ink. I always start with free writing, handwritten.
Interesting.
I never go straight to the computer and start writing. And in my early days of writing, I drafted in longhand. So all the planning I do, is pen and paper. And I'm just comfortable with that. I love to journal. That's a big part of it.
Let's talk about journaling. Journaling while you're writing or afterwards?
All the time. I journal, you know, at the beginning, during, and at the end. I call it throat clearing. I can't sit down and start writing. I always have to write something in the journal, and it's that.
Is it your to-do list? Or?
Oftentimes, a lot of times it'll be, and I will say
the next scene.
Yes, very often. I'll say what needs to happen in this chapter, and I'll kind of make a list, and I'll get an idea, and it's just, you know, it's kind of.
So it's your
tapping
planning.
It is.
It's your planning, because we tell kids that they have to brainstorm, organize, and plan. So you're validating what teachers say to students. Isn't this nice?
Yes.
So you journal as you write to see where you're going.
I do.
That's wonderful. And you do that all the time?
All the time. I do it all the time. You know, when I was in college, I remember one of my literature professors, we were reading Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath. And this professor had developed a relationship with Steinbeck. He had written him, and they had, you know, corresponded. And the professor brought in excerpts of things that Steinbeck had been writing, you know, when he was writing Grapes of Wrath. And it struck me, because here I was, you know, I was a college student, you know, 20, 21, 22, and I was not writing myself yet. And I thought, oh, really? He, you know, thinks about what he's going to write before he writes it. I didn't, you know, I hadn't thought of that yet. And
Isn't that interesting? Because I think kids think so much that you just sit down, type it, and it's a final draft.
Right.
They don't realize that there's thought and planning and
Absolutely.
erasing
Right.
and putting it aside and digesting it. And
the finished product looks nice, but the process is messy.
yes.
And it's back and forth, and there are mistakes, and there are stops and starts, and yeah, it's a messy process.
Yeah,
and it's not linear. It can be all over the place.
Let's take that thought with us into the academic discussions, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that we really need to share with teachers how messy reading and writing is.
Mm-hmm.
In that element, that it's just, you forget of just how messy it is, even though it doesn't look messy because you see the end product.
Right, right.
So it doesn't seem messy, but it is
Yes.
really messy. It is,
Yes.
that's the perfect word for it. I love hearing about your spiral notebook, your pen. Do you have a time of day that you like to write? Or do you have a writing room?
I do have a writing room. I like to write in my living room, which makes it hard.
That's action-packed. You've
It
got
is.
2 boys, you've got dogs, you have a husband. You're
It is.
a wife and a mom, and you
Yeah.
write in your living room?
I do. You know, there are
picture
times
it.
when I've written in you know, our office,
Okay.
our home office. But I love to write in my living room. It's painted yellow, and I love that kind of, you know, rich color.
Okay.
And when the weather's
Nice.
nice, if the window's open, my neighbor has a fountain outside, and I can hear the
Oh,
water
nice.
rippling. It can be hard, though, you know, in the heart of the family, if there's a lot of activity going on. But
Yeah.
if everybody's away and out of the house, and I'm on my own,
That's the place. That's
yeah.
that's your
Yeah.
go-to place.
it can be a great spot. But, you know, back to what you were saying earlier about, you know, the messiness of writing, is the difference between the process versus the product.
True.
Because the product is that book,
Right.
or that report,
Yeah.
or that research paper that's all neatly typed and everything is where it needs to be. But the process is everything else. All the reading that you did, all the note-taking that you did, you know, all of the scribbling and marking things out, and
Well, it's
all
so
of that.
true, because that's the depth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're trying to teach kids at the 7th and 8th grade level, because they're really being launched into critical thinking for the first time. They're launched into analysis and interpretation. We're going to take a break and come back to that thought. Thank you. We'll be right back with Katy Grant. We're back with Katy Grant. We were just talking about her routine and talking about the depth of writing, since it's a messy event. And our job as teachers to talk about research and getting kids to get that depth. This is really their first time practicing that at the 7th grade level. So you do research. These guys are a Google world. They want to just take the first thing. They want to write one thing. So can you talk to us about the research that you do, and possibly the research that you did for hide and seek?
Absolutely. And, you know, the interesting thing about hide and seek was I was doing research for that book without even realizing that I was doing research.
Nice.
Because that family vacation ended up being such a source of inspiration for the entire book, and I didn't even know it.
Okay. So that whole experience with the trip, and which is a family vacation that you just did.
Right,
So
right.
you ended up going back to it and using it as a template, using it as, that's your notes. That could have been like your live journaling.
Exactly.
Oh,
And so
cool.
when I got home from that vacation, I wrote down all the experiences we had. We had a lot of wildlife encounters. Those come out in the book. We had the
elk.
We saw
Deer.
elk, we saw deer, we heard Canada geese flying overhead. We did some geocaches on our own. We were you know, rookie city people going out without flashlights late in the afternoon and losing daylight, and so I thought that's a great source of conflict.
You need to come to our cardigan planning.
Right, and so I thought, why not do that to my character, where he's out and he's about, you know, it's getting dark. He stays out later than he expects to.
So that was your research.
So I did that research, but then I did a lot of other type of research as well. Well, one thing that I did, because I was writing it in the fall of 2007, I used that calendar, you know, as the guideline. And so there are many specific references to events, you know, like Chase mentions that his father wants to take him to a Phoenix Suns LA Lakers basketball game.
Yep.
And they have the date on there. Well, I looked at the schedule to see when do the Lakers play the Suns in Phoenix?
That's great.
And so I put that in
So
there.
it's authentic.
It is.
It's all authentic.
It is. And Chase, another conflict that he has, his parents would like for, especially his father, would like for him to go to a prep school in Phoenix.
Yep.
And I looked up to see, you know, when is the open house for this private school in Phoenix? When did they do that open house? They do it in the fall.
Nice.
And so I did a lot of research, you know, just, now you said, you know, these are Google kids, and, you know, I tell you, I have to tell you, I love the internet.
Yeah, I was just thinking that
Mm-hmm.
you realize in your thoughts that you have to find this out.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be authentic, and yet you have that at your fingertips.
I did. And so it is a great resource for a writer, because I do remember the days when I was in college, pre-internet days, where we went to the library.
Yes.
But I love that part too.
Yeah.
You know, I loved wandering through the stacks and, you know, making that discovery and being on that journey. And so it's definitely convenient to be typing away on my Word document and say, oh, I need to know this.
Yep.
And then, you know, opening up, you know, a browser window and you know, typing something in and finding it like that. You know, for example, Chase, it's getting dark, and he's rushing home. Well, I had in mind this specific date that this was taking place on, and so I Googled it and found what time does the sun set in Arizona in this location on this date, and there I found a table that told me that time.
What makes it so appealing to us as 7th and 8th graders, because it's so authentic.
Right, and so there is that. There is
That's
the
important.
internet research.
It's really important.
But the other thing for you know, students to think about is that research is, you know, that's what we call secondary research, but there's primary research as well.
Right.
And so for some of the other books that I have written, you know, like the summer camp books that we were talking about, one of them features horseback riding. Now, you know, I rode when I was 13, 14 years old.
Yep.
I just don't remember all the specifics about it.
Right, that vocabulary.
Exactly.
Specific vocabulary for we talk about it in content. You needed it for the content of horseback
And
riding.
it goes back to what we were saying earlier about students in class writing, you know, getting a grasp on the material. And it's one thing to think you understand it, but it's something else to write about it.
To write about it.
And so for me to be able to write about, you know, what they were doing with, you know, you know, in terms of saddling up the horses and all the terminology.
It has to be precise.
I had to do research for that, and so I went and visited riders, and you know, I went to barns and stables, and I watched people ride, and I talked to, you know, people about their experiences, and so I did that kind of primary research as well.
Excellent.
But the thing about research, and you know, this is something that I hope that students would enjoy as well, is it's a quest, you know, it's a treasure hunt, and you want that information, and so you're eager to find it, and you're eager
motivated.
To get it. So I hope that if students are researching something that they're really curious about, and that they're really interested in, then the joy of discovery, you know, is part of the quest. Yes.
Tell us how you came to your title, Hide and Seek. It's so appealing.
Well, I'm glad you like the title.
It's a great match. It's a great title. How'd you get to it?
You know, to be honest, to tell you the full story, I didn't come up with the title, and this is not unusual.
Okay.
The title often changes. With my creative writing students in the community college, I do an exercise on, you know, brainstorming and thinking of titles, and I tease them. I say, okay, I want you all to come up with a title so that when the book is about to be published, your editor can change that.
Okay.
Because oftentimes, you know, writers can write great books.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes we struggle with titles. And
so did you have one as a placeholder?
I did.
Okay.
The first title of the book was a mouthful. It was Hidden Cache, Stolen Treasure.
Okay.
And it was a little too cumbersome. And I knew, you know, I just kind of put it on there. And I thought, okay, so, you know, that's a starting place. And my agent said, work on the title. And so, you know, a friend of mine, a fellow writer friend of mine, and she lives in New York, and I live in Arizona, so, you know, everything takes place over, you know, email or phone calls. So we were on the phone, and we were just brainstorming titles together. And we came up with a completely different title, and for a long while, it was called Gray Wolf Crossing.
Oh, I wouldn't. Now, see, I could see the hidden cache and treasure one, and this is Gray Wolf Crossing.
This is Gray Wolf Crossing.
With a brainstorm with a pal collaboration. We love that.
Right, because initially there was a whole chapter about an encounter that Chase has with a wolf, and that ended up coming out.
Yes,
and that's not even in the book at all.
Yes.
But, you know, there was information in there about how gray wolves were being reintroduced into the region. And my editor saw that title. So, you know, the agent didn't like the first title. My editor saw this title, and she said, it doesn't really tell us anything.
Right.
And it's just the place where the geocache, you know, Chase says, I turned off onto onto this road, and it was Gray Wolf Crossing. And she said, that doesn't tell us anything, so we really want to, you know, we want to play around with it. And we struck on the idea of, you know, the hiding, you know, and so we had a lot of variations on hiding. We had, like, hidden and, you know, hiding treasure.
Yeah.
And we played around with a bunch of different titles until we settled on hide and seek. So
that's great.
It's funny.
An
it's
awesome
often
title.
A committee decision on how to come up with that title. Yes.
We love brainstorming and
right.
collaboration. Well, I think you landed with a great title, and we're thrilled to have had you and Hide and Seek and the novel for the whole school community. Katy Grant, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much.
It's been wonderful. We have 3 great days ahead of
us.
us.
It's exciting. So
Drink
I'm
your
so
water.
excited.
You're here for vacation. She's going to stay afterwards and explore New Hampshire, her first trip from Arizona. And we're thrilled to have Katy Grant with us and share our school, our state, and we share her book, Hide and Seek. Thank you, Katy Grant. It's been a treat. I'm looking forward to our 3 days together.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lurgio. Author Stalker's going to hang up her cape, and I'll see you soon next time right here in Bedford, New Hampshire. Take care.